If you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them, and it is your power to wipe out that judgment now. I just finished reading Flow by Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. He's the pioneer in the field of studying peak performance or flow states. And his work was really the foundation for a lot of concepts that people use today, and many of the authors and thinkers that I have based my ideas on base their ideas on him. So reading the original was very good. And in a lot of ways, at the beginning, it reminded me of a lot of the Stoic writings that I've read, and an emphasis on being able to control one's attention and one's own consciousness. The information we allow into consciousness becomes extremely important. It is, in fact, what determines the content and the quality of life. So, this book is basically all about quality of life and happiness. And Mihail Csikszentmihalyi is a trained psychologist who's done studies on happiness. This book is about how to achieve enjoyment or happiness. You're in a situation where, like Michael Jordan, he's playing basketball and he is not even really thinking about what he's doing. He loses track of himself, and it's those highest moments of human performance, and that's what this book is about. So the opposite of those flow moments is what he calls psychic entropy. So that's an important thing, and he talks about 8 elements to a flow state. So the first one is we are confronting a task that we have a good chance of completing. That's very important. Second, we must be able to concentrate on what we are doing. So we're not on our phone and thinking about other things. We're fully focused on it. And you can be sure that athletes who often experience these flow states, or maybe like a race car driver or something like that, when they're doing that activity, they're not thinking about other things. They are completely concentrated. The third aspect is there are clear goals. So when you're playing a basketball game, or you're in a race, or playing some other type of game, or maybe performing a musical instrument, you have clear goals about what you're doing. There's immediate feedback. So immediate feedback telling you how well you're doing. So as you are in a race, or maybe you're running a race, you can see like where you are related to other people, and as you work harder or whatever, you get immediate feedback telling you you're doing worse or you're doing better. Immediate feedback. Then the fifth element is deep, effortless involvement, removing the awareness of everyday worries. So this is similar to the concentration one, but you're not thinking about your worries. So in technical terms, your default mode network is not activated. You are so focused on the task that you're not just ruminating about your grocery bills or things like that. The sixth element is it allows the exercise of control over your own actions. So you are in control. You have a sense that you are in control of what is happening and your actions and what you're putting into the flow state. 7, the concern for yourself disappears, and there's a moment of a lack of self-consciousness. So if you achieve flow states while you're dancing, then you're not thinking about, oh, oh my gosh, what do they think about me? Do I look okay right now? No, you're like you're so in the zone, you're so into your dancing that it doesn't matter what is happening around you at all. And so you talk to people who experience these flow states, and that is one of the commonalities. They don't know, they don't see what's going on around them, and they don't care how they look. So lack of self-consciousness. But the irony is that, or the paradoxical thing is that at the end of the flow state, the sense of self is actually strengthened, even though the sense of self-consciousness around the self goes away during the flow state. And the final 8th element of a flow state is an alteration in your sense of time. So you speak to a lot of athletes or you speak to virtuosos in music, or anybody who's experienced a flow state, an author while they're writing, or a poet or a painter, and you talk to them and they'll either say, time went so slow, I could see every single move that the other karate person was getting ready to do, and time went so slow that I could dissect time. Or the opposite, where the painter says, wow, a whole day passed and I didn't even eat lunch. And so if you notice that you missed a meal, that's an indication that you're in a flow state. So those are the 8 elements of a flow state. Another important vocabulary that he brings up in here is autotelic. Autotelic means intrinsically rewarding a goal onto itself. So he expands this term and uses it to describe autotelic personalities, autotelic jobs, autotelic cultures, and basically it's where the rewards come from within you. So I do archery, for example, because the rewards I feel, the benefits come from within me. I don't do archery because I love the attention that other people give me when I do archery. So that is an important distinction. So autotelic is something that is intrinsically rewarding. The goal, it's a goal onto itself. You're not doing archery because you're going to get this certain outcome at the end. You're doing it because you enjoy doing archery. Versus exotelic. Exotelic would be the outcome is the goal. I'm going to do archery because it will look cool on my Facebook page if I have a photo of me, shooting a bow. He really trashes on TV a lot in this book. I like that, it's pretty funny. He talks about a paradox in the US, and remember, this is written in 1990, so I think TV was a really big deal in the US then. People were spending a lot of time watching TV, and he did these studies where he put beepers on people, and the beeper would go off at random times during the day, and then they'd have to fill out a survey about what they were doing, how they were enjoying it, what they were thinking, what they were feeling. So he did really hard research. He's not just making this shit up. He did hard research about people, how they spend their time, and how they feel about that. And he found that even though in the US people were saying that they wanted leisure time, not working time, that they actually, when they were surveyed during their leisure time, they weren't having very much enjoyment. And then when they were asked what they wanted, Americans said that they wanted more leisure time, but during those moments where on the random surveys where they were performing leisure activities, they said that they actually weren't having very much enjoyment. So that's the paradox there about leisure. He goes into some really interesting stuff about family and the role of family and family upbringing. And he talks about clarity, centering, choice, commitment, and challenge as being the 5 things very important for developing an autotelic personality in a child. So basically, those are things that, if provided for in a family setting, will really help an individual develop an autotelic personality, which will allow them to experience flow more often, which will allow them to be more happy. So the funny thing is that Americans have this tendency to pursue activities that cost a lot of resources, but material resources, but they don't tend to pursue activities that cost more psychic energy. So like, do I have to be uncomfortable? Do I have to work hard? Do I have to question a lot of my assumptions or put myself in an awkward, uncomfortable place to tackle this activity? Or do I just buy an expensive ass flat screen TV and sit on my butt watching movies on Netflix? Or do I just buy? We put an emphasis on buying things and spending things and burning gas, burning whatever to enjoy leisure. Things that cost more psychic energy will end up providing more deep enjoyment in the end than things that cost more resources. So if you invest in learning a foreign language or doing those things that make you feel awkward at first or traveling in another country, Those things, they're more difficult at first and they cost psychic energy, but in the long run, you will get more enjoyment out of those things. Another thing he talks about with TV is that TV basically is a way to, instead of taking that awkward time when you're by yourself after work, or the awkward time with your family after a long day of work where everyone's tired and it would take a lot of psychic energy to talk about difficult things with your kids, for example. Instead, you can all just sit in front of the TV and vegetate, and it forces an external structure on the brain instead of having to come up with something to do with yourself, or where does your mind go when you're by yourself. And if you're just watching TV, you don't have to worry about where your mind goes when you're by yourself. So that is one of the downsides of TV. And it also sets you up, if you don't have internal controls, um, and you don't have like symbolic systems that you can fall into, like dance or music or art or these other things. Like, what if you did improv with your family at home instead of watching TV? If you don't practice any of those things and you're dependent on these um, external sources of structure from TV or from watching movies or from going to an entertainment park or whatever, where everything's provided for you, you just pay resources, not psychic energy, then you become vulnerable to the media and to demagogues, because you're basically just a consumer and you don't have the critical thinking. This is all, what he's saying. Another thing that I really loved is he redefines the words amateur and dilettante, which have, both of those have very negative connotations in our culture. Like, oh, he's an amateur, and professional is like a great thing. And a dilettante, oh, that's often used for people who are like interested in studying a lot of things, like me maybe. And people are like, oh, what a dilettante. Amateur, I already knew that one, comes from the Latin root to love, amare, amor, j'aime, and those all come from the root to love. And so an amateur is someone who does something that they love. And obviously, if you're doing something that you love, you're more likely to experience flow. And a dilettante, it comes from the same root as delicious and delightful. And so a dilettante is someone who finds delight in. And both of these, amateurs and dilettantes, they focus on experiences, not products. And so that part like sold me on this book. He talked about cultures, traditional cultures, like some of the hunter-gatherer societies that have been studied, like the Khoisan in the Kalahari, the Khoisan Bushmen. In those places, or even in pre-industrial European societies, it has been found that there's often not a clear distinction between work and free time, and that those people are often the happiest. We have a really fucked up way of looking at work in our society, and that's something that I've talked about before and we'll talk about more, but this book goes into that. In this society, we cherish this concept of free time, but we often don't end up enjoying it, and that we get more fulfillment from those things that are more challenging, which often actually happen in our work environments. Which are the jobs that are more likely to foster flow states? He talks about hunting and fishing as being very game-like, and that games tend to meet a lot of the requirements for a flow state. They have clear goals, like how do you win? There's clear definitions of the game, the beginning and the end. There's immediate feedback. When you're playing Monopoly, like, oh, I'm doing well, oh, I'm doing bad. Deep, effortless involvement. You forget about other things you're doing. So hunting and fishing are given as examples of game-like activities that really facilitate flow. He talks about how a lot of these cottage industries in Europe really sustained a sense of flow, even within the family and within the community, and that, people would be doing their weaving work at home and the whole family was like weaving textiles, and that industrialization really fucked that up. And that when people started going to factories and working 16 hours a day and everything was broken up to be as efficient as possible, that totally destroyed this sense of flow that was happening before. The paradox of work that he ends up discovering in the US is that even though people say that they want to spend less time working and more time at leisure, when he did these studies with the beepers that would go off at random times, people actually reported more enjoyable moments, more flow moments when they were being challenged at work. And when the beeper would go off during their leisure activities, they were often reporting low moods and reflecting on negative things or worrying about going back to work, for example. So that's the paradox there, um, of work. And most people in the US who are dissatisfied workers report three things. Lack of variety and challenge was number one. So not enough different things they're doing. So thanks to industrialization, people are now doing like a very specialized thing over and over and over again. So lack of variety and lack of challenge. So those kind of go hand in hand. The next one was conflicts with other people, especially bosses. So that ties back into control, which having control is one of the important factors for experiencing flow. And then burnout and stress. So people get burnt out and stressed from their jobs. So it's not a sustainable thing. The most important life trait is being able to turn adversity into an enjoyable challenge. So that is a pretty amazing thing. And that's why a lot of people really enjoy being motivated by, or a lot of the best motivational speakers are people who've had to deal with great adversity. And so basically the thesis of this book is that achieving flow states is more important than material conditions. So really what it's all about is if you can figure out how to achieve more flow states, design a life where you put yourself in the place to achieve more flow states and to be in those optimal performance situations more often. If you do that, that's more important than how much money you have, how healthy you are, how rich you are, all of those things. And so Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, this book is really well written. He must have spent a long time organizing it, because unlike some of the stuff that I've read recently or stuff that's come out lately, he really put the time in to design the book logically in a way that like the argument builds in a way that is very tight, and he connects it to all these different parts of life, and it's really, really convincing and really good. I recommend it. It would be good to combine with something like Walden Pond. That's the book that I combined it with. It would also be good to combine with some more spiritual type reading, like the Bhagavad Gita, for example, or things about meditation. It would also be really good for people who play sports or are athletes in any way or do anything competitive. Would also be good for managers, has applications there for managers, how to create a workspace that allows for flow. So overall, I mean, you can see I put a lot of sticky notes in this book. It's worth a read. I purchased it a while ago and didn't get around to reading it, but I highly recommend reading it. I think it might be available on Audible too, but this is the kind of book that could really, be the changing point or turning point in someone's life. So it could also be a good present. But yeah, go out there, read Flow. Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, he's awesome. Highly recommend this book.